Let's continue with our discussion of calculating amount paid by patient. Remember, in this equation, it's important that you don't forget to include deductible, even though it might not be specifically mentioned in the question. Let's look at our first example. Philip is single and has a health insurance plan with the benefits shown in the figure. You can see the table on the right. His recent network healthcare costs include copayments for 4 physician visits and 7 specialist visits. Following a surgery, he made copayments for 10 physical therapy visits and had 60 visits from a home healthcare nurse at $60 each. His hospital admission charge was $200 and his hospital bill was $16,870. What amount did he pay? Hint, the hospital admission charge is not covered by Philip's insurance. So again, the difficulty here is first remembering to include deductible, and second, there are a lot of moving pieces and we have to kind of keep track of everything as we go. So if we look at our equation to figure out amount paid by patient, which is the goal here, remember that the question says, what amount did he pay? They're asking, based on all of this information they've given us, what is the amount paid by the patient? So let's just start by looking at the equation. So the first thing it mentions is the deductible. Okay, so deductible was not mentioned in here, but we can look at the healthcare benefit schedule and find deductible. So you can see here it says annual deductible, and then it's for single or family, and then network or non-network. Well, it said in here that Philip is single, and then it says his recent network healthcare costs, meaning these were in-network. They would specifically say out-of-network healthcare costs if it was out-of-network, or non-network healthcare costs. So, what number then are we reading from this table? Well, it looks like if he is single and it's a network deductible, that our cost is going to be $275. And so one way I'm going to do this just to kind of keep track as we go on the screen is I'll kind of write some notes in the margin here on the right. Obviously, I know that when you're working on this, you can't write on your screen, but maybe you could just kind of do the same thing, write deductible $275 and then just keep writing out your small little pieces of the puzzle as you go, and then eventually we'll get to the part where we take the sum. All right, let's just keep reading now. So we got that part of the equation. The next part is copayments and coinsurance amount. Remember that those are more or less the same thing. You can see here it says copayment, coinsurance / copayment, right? So it says it includes copayments for 4 physician visits. So you go on the table, you find physician visit. We're looking in the network column. And in fact, since we know these are all going to be network costs, we can ignore this side completely, right? Because we know that they were network costs. So we're not even going to have to look at the non-network column. Okay, so that's saying that each physician visit costs $15. And he had 4 visits. So we're going to end up doing 4 visits times $15 each. Okay, let's keep going. Are there other ones mentioned? Well, they do mention 7 specialist visits. Okay, let's find specialist. I see it here. Each one costs $30. So we'll end up having 7 times $30 to figure out our specialist visits. Next it says, following a surgery, he made copayments for 10 physical therapy visits. So we find physical therapy. Now something a little bit different here. It says the first 15 visits are $15. Over 15 visits, 85%. Now we don't need to worry about this because we only had 10 visits. So we'll just ignore that for now, okay? So for the first 15 visits, they're $15 each. So for those 10 visits, we're going to multiply by $15. Okay, and then what else do we have? He had 60 visits from a home healthcare nurse at $60 each. Now this is probably the second most missed thing when students do this problem. The way this says it, it kind of sounds like you should just immediately say, okay, each one costs $60. I'll do 60 times 60 for 60 visits, and the cost is 60. So right away they'll punch in 60 times 60. But we still need to read the table. You can see here where it says home health care. So they need to tell us the number of visits, right? Because that's how we've been calculating everything based on the number of. The reason that they're also including that price there is because based on the percentage of coverage, we're going to need to know that number. So when I look here, here's the case where we're going to have to do two separate calculations. So it says for the first 50 visits, 100%. And then there are those two asterisks that you can probably see, right? Right here, there's two asterisks. So if you look down here to those two asterisks, it says percentage of total cost covered by healthcare company. So if the healthcare company is covering 100% of the cost for the first 50 visits, then those first 50 visits are costing me nothing, right? They're covering 100% of the first 50 visits. But then it says for visits over 50, they're going to cover 80%, which is still pretty good. So they're covering 80% of however many visits you go past 50. So since we had 60 total visits, I guess I'll write this in blue. Since we had 60 total visits, that means 10 of them fall into this over 50 category, right? And it's covered at 80%. And so I'll put 10 times a question mark there, and we'll look at that on the next slide. So 10 visits times some amount that we'll have to do an extra calculation to figure out. So that's all of our copayments and coinsurance. Now let's move forward and take a look at our hospital charges. So they mentioned that his hospital admission charge was $200. And remember that in the hint they said the hospital admission charge is not covered by Philips Insurance. So we know right away that that's just going to be $200 for that admission charge. So I'll just write $200 down here just to kind of help me keep track. And then finally, they mention a hospital bill of $16,870. So again, don't just assume that you need to add $16,870. We'll look on the chart, and here it says hospital charges are covered 80%. Remember that double asterisk means that your healthcare company is covering that much. So they're covering 80% of $16,870. Okay, so 80%, and I'll just write a bill so we can do the calculation on the next slide. So these are all my notes that I've taken on the side, okay? And as I go to the next slide, you'll see that I've cleaned things up a bit. This is everything we need to know from the table, but what I would recommend when you get to this point is double check, just look at the table again, top to bottom. So annual deductible, yep, we covered that. Hospital charges, home health care, co-insurance, co-payment, we covered that. We didn't include ER costs because as far as we know, Philip didn't go to the ER and he wasn't in an ambulance, so there's no need to compute any costs there. So I think we're good to go. We'll move on to the next slide. So the way that I would start simplifying is I would recommend first, in the last slide, all those calculations I have on the right in blue, start by simplifying those. And those were the co-payments. So we had those 4 physician visits, we had those 7 specialist visits, those 10 physical therapy visits, and then remember with the healthcare nurse, the first 50 cost, we needed to pay 0%, which is why I'm multiplying by a 0. But then there were 10 more visits, that weren't covered, and the insurance company was going to pay 80%. If they're paying 80%, that means you're paying 20%, which is why you see this calculation, figuring out what 20% of $60 is, and then multiplying times 10. So when we take the sum of all of that, we get $540. And again, this is all the stuff I had written in blue in that margin. So we find the total of $540. Hospital charges. Remember we had that admission charge of $200, And then the insurance company was going to cover 80% of this bill. So if they're covering 80%, that means you're paying 20%. So we find 20% of this bill plus the admission charge, and our hospital charges are $3,574. So find the amount paid, we'll add it all together. So we have our deductible, the co-payments, which we calculated here, same thing as co-insurance amount, and then our hospital charges, which we calculated here. So altogether, it'll be that $275, the $540 in co-pays, and the $3,500 or so in hospital charges. And our final amount paid by patient is $4,389. So you can see that there's a lot of opportunity to make a simple mistake that makes your answer incorrect. So it's really important that when you do these problems, you take really clear notes of everything, double check your calculations as you go, and you should be fine. Let's look at one more example. Let's say Bryant is married and has a health insurance plan with benefits shown in this figure. His recent network healthcare costs include, and once again they give us the co-payments, physical therapy, home health care visits, etc. And once again, we are asked to figure out what amount did he pay. So remember, for amount paid by patient, it's equal to our deductible plus our co-payments and co-insurance plus hospital charges. So just like before, I recommend that we kind of just read this equation piece by piece and then figure out the elements of it as we go. So first step is our deductible. It says Bryant is married and has a health insurance plan with the benefits shown in the figure, and then it starts talking about his healthcare costs. So they don't mention the deductible. But what they do tell us is that Bryant is married and he has network healthcare costs. So when I look at annual deductible, we're going to look at family because Bryant is married, and we're going to look at network. So his deductible is going to be $750. And because they have already said to us that all of his recent costs were network, I'm just going to cross out this non-network side because we're not even going to have to work with it at all. Okay, now just like before, let's continue bit by bit. We'll read each little chunk at a time. So the first thing up is co-payments and co-insurance. Remember, these are, for our purposes, these are more or less the same thing. So these costs included co-payments for 6 physician visits. Each physician visit is $15. So I'm going to end up having to do, 6 visits times 15 because each one costs $15. Next, there are 8 specialist visits. 8 specialist visits. I find specialist, and I find that each one costs $30. So I'm going to do my 8 visits times $30 each. Next up, we have co-payments for 12 physical therapy visits. So here's physical therapy. The first 15 visits are $15 each. So once again, had we gone over 15 visits, we would have needed to do a calculation the same exact way we did with home health care before. But since he stayed under that limit, we can just do our flat multiplication. So there were 12 visits, and each one costs $15. And I'm leaving the dollar sign symbols out just because I know this is already small and I want it to be easy to read. Okay. Next up, he had 40 visits from a home healthcare nurse at $50 each. So home healthcare, the first 50 visits are covered 100%. Remember that double asterisk says that percent that they're giving is the percentage of total cost covered by the healthcare company. So there were 40 visits total. Insurance covers the first 50, so he's end up paying nothing, right? This is just going to be $0 for this because he did not exceed 50 visits. So that's all the co-pays. Next up, we have his hospital admission charge was $250. Remember in the hint that they mentioned that that hospital charge is not covered. So we'll end up having to add on $250. And finally, we have a hospital bill of $13,380. Remember, you are consulting the chart for every single time they give you a piece of information. Look on the chart. So just because they mention this hospital bill doesn't mean he's paying 100% of it. We go and find hospital charges on our sheet, and we find that the insurance company is going to cover 80%, meaning he's going to cover 20%. So we're going to end up calculating 20% of $13,680. So now all that's happening in the next slide really is that you're going to see me more neatly. I'm just going to take the sum of all of these numbers here, but you're just going to see me do it in a more neat and organized way. Okay, so we have everything we needed from this table. In fact, I forgot to write the deductible of $750 right there. We have everything we need from the table, and now we can move on and simplify. So first, gathering up all our co-payments, we had those physician visits, specialist visits, physical therapy. Remember the healthcare nurse, we didn't exceed the limit, so it's just 0. And then we add up the cost of all of that, and we find that in co-payments, we paid $510. Next, those hospital charges, which is the admission charge and 20% of the hospital bill. And we add it all together, including that deductible. So the amount paid by patient is equal to the deductible, $750, plus co-payments, which we calculated here, $510, and co-insurance, same thing, plus hospital charges, that $2,986 rather. So you find that the total amount paid by patient is $4,246. Now, one question you might have is why, if co-payments and co-insurance amount are the same thing, why do they have it written twice in this equation? It's just in case if there was a question where they mentioned co-payments and then they phrased it differently and mentioned a co-insurance amount in the same one, you would know that you just need to add all of that together. Okay, so don't let that trip you up. For the most part, for what we're doing in this class, you can treat co-payment and co-insurance amount as the same thing. Okay, and then we have our total amount paid by patient. So again, number 1, make sure you include the deductible when you add everything up. Don't forget it just because it's not included. Don't forget to use the table for every single thing you see in the prompt. So just because something's written, you know, if it mentions a healthcare nurse costing $50 a visit, doesn't mean you just calculate up the cost of that right away. You still need to refer to the chart. Same thing when they mention hospital charges. Just because they mention some amount, you still need to, for every little piece of information they give you, check the chart and see if this person is getting healthcare coverage for that item. If you can keep those two things in mind and, you know, take clear notes on these problems, I'm sure that you'll be able to answer them correctly on your exercises and on your final exam.